That sounded pretty good. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be with you, and to my good friend Mark, we appreciate the invitation that was extended as well. And welcome to New Mexico, welcome to Albuquerque. And Martin was absolutely right. We really want to encourage you to get down, and I know that we're talking a lot about how we can make sure that we keep ourselves a little more healthy, but you can disregard that for at least a day or two as you take in tortillas and chile and chicharrones. And I can name a few wonderful places where we'd encourage you to go do that, because the food here is just wonderful. That, I think, is a good segue into really what we've learned in New Mexico and why this is so important. One of the first things that I hope we can do, and that I hope we can take back to our respective homes, communities, towns across the country, is to dispel this myth that continues to plague this debate that climate change and global warming isn't real. And I think that's one of the first things that we have to recognize. It's one of those things that we continue to hear from people, whether I'm in Washington, D.C. or around different parts of the country, that they're still not sure about the science. Well, I'm not a scientist, but as I read the research and I look to see what they've uncovered, there seems to be no question left that we have to do something to reverse what is occurring as a result of the emissions. In this case, carbon emissions. We attacked the problem in the mid-1990s when it came to acid rain. Understanding the impacts to our country. Understanding the impacts to a global community. And what was interesting then is when we implemented some of what we learned about acid rain and some of the provisions to be able to reverse those trends, industry actually exceeded what the responsibilities were for them to reduce NOx and SOx. The economy grew, utility rates went down, interestingly enough. And so, as we look to see some of the myths and misconceptions, and you know, as I came home this recess, I learned more and more of the misconceptions. But it's something that we need to arm ourselves with the facts to be able to go back to our communities, to our business leaders, to our family and friends as we sit around the dinner table and shed some light on these issues. You know, in New Mexico, I talked about food a little bit earlier. We talk about sustainability, about the importance of water in our land, the importance of climate, what it means to our way of life. You know, we're trying to encourage more people to live sustainable lives, to be conservationists when it comes to being responsible with our land and our water around the country. Something we've been doing here for a long time. Something that people have been doing around the country for a long time. And we need to look back into history to learn to see what we can do to build upon that foundation that was developed for us. You know, where I live, I'm really fortunate through my front yard. Those of you that are not from New Mexico, come out here and we'll show you what we mean. But there's an acequia that runs through my front yard. It's an old waterway, a ditch, an aqueduct, if you will, to be able to provide a way of life to our people. And there's families that for generation after generation have depended upon the acequias to provide for their families, whether it was growing a garden or raising their animals. And then they would trade these foods or the animals that they would grow with their neighbors to be able to provide sustenance for the community. And at a certain level, as we talk about what's happening domestically and across the United States, and even internationally, and in the global community, to see these practices that we're trying to teach. Now, what does that have to do with energy and climate change and global warming? Well, we talk about job opportunity and job creation, and leaning upon those that know how to do these things, that have the skill set, the knowledge, that's been passed on from generation to generation, that's been firmed up with those of our peers that have dedicated themselves to the educational efforts to be able to refine some of these practices and put them into documents so we can share them with others. To be able to institute these practices into our way of life, into our businesses, into corporations, into nonprofits, into organizations around the country. Now, that leads to more opportunity that we have. And as we talk about how this can impact and will impact the Latino community, the Hispanic community, the Chicano community, I'll tell you, everywhere that we go, I learn more and more about my friends from Puerto Rico, aquí from Nuevo Mexico. You know, Renee reminds me about the importance of our Chicano community all the time, a good friend of mine that's here today. But it's all of us coming together to truly see the opportunities that exist. And one of the reasons that this discussion needs to center around the Latino community, Hispano community, is because we need to face the fact that it's a growing segment of the population. As we look to see the transition of what's going to occur in the next few years, 1 in 5, 1 in 4 different studies are dictating different things. And we're very anxious to see what the census data this year will dictate. But as we look to diversify our workforce, to close the disparities that exist with healthcare, with education, this is a segment of the population that we cannot ignore. And as we look to make sure that we're including different parts of the population, the energy bill, I was really honored that Congressman Markey and Chairman Waxman worked closely with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus to include the participation of Hispanic serving institutions and Native American institutions across the country to provide partnerships and collaborative efforts with colleges like Yale and Harvard, MIT, to work with these institutions to further opportunities. In New Mexico, it's something that we understand. Most of our colleges here are Hispanic serving institutions, just by the very nature of the population that we have here. Now, as we look to close the healthcare disparities, and I think that the presentation that I followed is perfect, because the injustices that occur around the country do impact certain communities more. Recently, I participated in a forum around education and seeing what we can do to bring attention to the fact that Hispanics, African Americans, Native Americans, that were failing in schools at a disproportionate rate. But then they delved into looking at socioeconomic conditions as well. And it doesn't discriminate. And so as we look to see how we can further these policies around, make differences, make huge strides, and build upon the relationships and networks that are here today, that's what I hope we can talk about a little bit more. Because the experiences that each and every one of us brings to this debate is going to be absolutely critical to make sure we get more people on it. And as we look to change behavior and bring attention to how we can impact what's happening to us globally, what's happening to us nationally, what's happening to us here at home, we need to depend on one another. And we can't fight over, this is my turf, this is your turf. We all have a stake in this. And that's why I appreciate so much when groups come together, like the one that's represented today, to talk about their experiences, to talk about what they've learned, to talk about what hasn't worked, and how we can work with labor, how we can work with the environmental community, how we can work with organizations like NCLR, how we can work with groups here at home that are cultivating a nurturing environment to make a difference. And that's what we're talking about here. The benefits are obvious. But I believe to be a $1 trillion emerging economy waiting to erupt. Now we as a nation, we have a choice. We can let Germany and Japan and China lead the way as it comes to renewables. Improving technologies that we developed here in the United States. Practices that we've helped develop and improve. And we can take advantage of those job opportunities and bring them right here back at home. Make sure that we're looking to job creation and job opportunities and things that have been committed in the energy bill to be able to fully deploy those and make them work. Or we can choose to ignore it. Let things continue to go on until there's no food left, and until the Rio Grande continues to get drier, and those acequias don't run anymore. Then we're depending upon other economies around the world to be able to bring more food and energy to the country. Like we depend on foreign nations that don't like us very much to send us oil. This is revolutionary right now. We have an opportunity to change this together. And as a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, this is something we're taking seriously. This is something that's being taken seriously here in New Mexico. This is something that's being taken seriously across the country. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus, we have a task force on green jobs and green energy. We're looking forward to many of you that will be participating in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute's a gala and conference, issues conference, come October. I want to make sure that we get a chance to get to know some of you that I don't know very well, so that we can lean upon that institutional knowledge, get into your brain, your heart, and your soul, so we can make this happen. So, sorry for taking probably a little bit more time than I should have this morning, but this is a very important issue, and it's critical, and the fact that you're all here shows that we care about this. And we can choose to act together, we can choose to do nothing. I say we act. And I just appreciate so much the friendships that I have today and getting to know some of you a little bit more and seeing a few of you that I haven't seen in some years to show the commitment that you all have to not only to the betterment of the country, but the betterment of the Hispano, Latino, and Chicano community here in the United States. Thanks for having me today.